This is my true story. My daughter told everyone I was losing my mind. She took my car keys, corrected my words, and whispered to neighbors that I was slipping. Even the doctor appointments she scheduled felt like pity dressed as care. I started doubting myself until the day of the test. She sat beside me, smiling, ready to hear the results that would prove I was gone. But when the doctor handed her the paper, her smile died instantly. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It started quietly. At first, I didn't notice the change. My daughter began speaking for me during family calls, correcting me, finishing my sentences. She would laugh and say, "Mom's getting forgetful these days." People on the other end laughed too. I laughed along, pretending it didn't hurt. But each time, a little piece of me disappeared. Soon, she wasn't joking anymore. She started telling everyone that I was losing my mind. My relatives began calling with soft voices, asking how I felt, if I remembered to take my medicine. Friends who once asked for advice now spoke to me like I was fragile glass. My own words seemed to bounce off walls that no one heard. Every time I tried to explain something, my daughter would interrupt and say, "She gets confused." I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. It became clear how fast rumors move. A single whisper grew into a label. Neighbors began treating me differently. They offered to help carry my groceries even when I didn't ask. At first, I thought it was kindness. Then I realized they were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake that would prove my daughter right. I began double-checking everything: the stove, the locks, the bills. I wanted no proof against me. My daughter acted sweetly in public. She told people she was worried about me. Behind closed doors, she sighed loudly every time I asked a question. She kept saying, "You're not yourself lately, Mom." I looked at her and wondered, who was she seeing? Because inside, I was still sharp, still aware, still me. I remembered every word, every look, every sigh. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my daughter's respect. Each family visit became smaller for me. I wasn't asked to cook anymore. I wasn't allowed to go to the market. She said it was for my safety. I felt useless. I watched her make decisions in front of me as if I wasn't there. She spoke about me in the third person. "She doesn't understand things anymore," she'd say. I sat in the same room, invisible. It got worse when relatives stopped coming altogether. They called my daughter instead. They didn't want to disturb me, they said. I realized she had succeeded. She made everyone believe I was too fragile to live normally. She built a story around me, and I was trapped inside it. Every small error I made, forgetting my glasses, misplacing keys, became proof. I began writing things down in a notebook. Dates, times, what I ate, what I did. I wasn't doing it for memory. I was doing it for defense. If anyone questioned me, I could show them. Proof that I was still in control. It was a strange kind of survival. But when your own child starts painting you as weak, you start protecting yourself from love. Sometimes at night, I cried quietly so she wouldn't hear. I missed my daughter, not the woman who now treated me like a patient, but the girl who used to laugh with me, hug me, trust me. I wondered what changed. Was it greed? Was it guilt? Or was it simply convenience? Making me look fragile gave her power, and she enjoyed it. One morning, I overheard her on the phone. She told someone, "Mom doesn't even know what day it is." I stood behind the door, holding my breath. I wanted to step out and shout, "It's Tuesday the 14th." But I didn't. I knew then that no matter what I said, the world would believe her first. I had become a story told by someone else. The saddest part wasn't the lies. It was that she didn't care how they made me feel. She was proud of her control, proud of being seen as the responsible daughter. But I was still her mother. I had raised her, fed her, taught her everything she knew, and now she was using that knowledge to erase me. That was the moment I stopped crying. I decided if she wanted to play with truth, I would let her, because one day, truth would play back. The first doctor's visit came out of nowhere. My daughter said she had made an appointment just to check on me. I thought it was routine, but when we arrived, I realized she had already filled out the forms. My name, my symptoms, my supposed forgetfulness, all written in her handwriting. I sat quietly while she handed the papers to the nurse. I wanted to correct her, to say I never complained about confusion or memory loss, but my throat felt tight. The nurse smiled kindly at me, the way people smile at patients who don't understand what's happening. When the doctor came in, my daughter started talking before I could. She told him I misplaced things, that I repeated stories, that I forgot dates. I wanted to explain that sometimes I just got tired, not confused. But she kept speaking, her tone soft and convincing. The doctor looked at me, asked a few short questions, and scribbled notes on his pad. I could tell he already believed her version. I answered carefully, forcing myself to stay calm. But every time I spoke, she interrupted. I felt like a witness in my own trial. After the appointment, she smiled and said she was proud of me for cooperating. I didn't answer. My chest hurt with anger I couldn't show. On the drive home, she talked about scheduling more tests, to be safe. Her words sounded loving, but I knew better. It wasn't safety she wanted, it was control. She wanted doctors' papers to back her story. And I realized how easy it was to lose your voice once people decide you're broken. In the following weeks, there were more appointments, blood tests, scans, evaluations. Each one made me smaller. Every result came back normal, but she kept saying, "Let's double check." I wondered if she even read the reports, or if she just needed the process itself, proof to others that she cared while she quietly prepared her next move. I saw how cleverly she worked. In front of others, she played the role of a loving daughter. Behind closed doors, she rolled her eyes whenever I spoke, as if talking to a child. I began to question myself, not my memory, but my worth. I wondered if maybe I had really become too dependent, too slow. I started staying in my room more, just to avoid giving her a reason to criticize. Sometimes I caught myself second-guessing everything. Did I turn off the light? Did I lock the door? Her voice echoed in my head saying, "You're getting confused." That was when I understood how manipulation works. It doesn't only trick others, it makes you doubt your own truth. One evening, she brought home new documents. She said the lawyer needed my signature for some precautionary paperwork. I didn't sign. I told her I would read it first. She smiled stiffly and said, "Of course, Mom." When she left the room, I glanced at the top line. It mentioned legal guardianship in case of cognitive decline. My hands shook. That was when the fear turned into anger. I had spent my life raising her, teaching her honesty. Now she was preparing to declare me incapable. After that night, I stopped trusting her. I pretended to be cooperative, but began paying close attention to everything she did. I noticed how she took phone calls in another room, how she hid envelopes, how she avoided letting me handle my own mail. It was as if she was building a wall around my life and locking the gate from her side. Every day I lost a little more freedom. First my car keys, then my phone. She said it was for my safety, but I knew the truth. Safety for her meant silence for me. At my next checkup, I tried to speak to the doctor alone, but my daughter followed me everywhere. She even stood beside me when he asked questions. I felt trapped. The nurse looked at me with sympathy, but she didn't interfere. Everyone assumed my daughter knew best. I smiled through it all, but inside I was planning. If they wanted to test me, I would make sure the right person got tested too. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself that I wasn't crazy. I repeated it over and over until I believed it again. I wasn't losing my mind, I was losing my freedom, and there was a difference. And I decided I wouldn't let her take that from me quietly. After that appointment, things at home began to shift in small, dangerous ways. My daughter started keeping my things safe. First, it was my car keys. She said she didn't want me driving alone anymore. Then she took my phone at night saying I needed rest. I believed her at first. It sounded caring. But soon, I realized she wasn't protecting me. She was isolating me. Every day, a little more of my independence disappeared behind polite excuses. I noticed how she started opening my letters before handing them to me. When I asked why, she smiled and said, "I'm just checking for scams." She began organizing my bank papers, claiming she was helping with bills. But her hands lingered too long on the envelopes marked account details. I knew those papers better than anyone. I had kept every receipt, every record for decades. She thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw how carefully she folded them away in her drawer instead of mine. She started keeping track of my routine, When I went for walks, she would call to ask where I was. If I stayed too long outside, she waited at the door with her arms crossed, pretending to worry. Once she even followed me to the corner shop. The shopkeeper told me later that she had asked him to keep an eye on me in case I seemed lost. I laughed then, but inside, it hurt. She had turned my whole world into a test I never agreed to take. At home, she made small changes that looked helpful but felt wrong. Labels on containers, sticky notes on doors, reminders taped to the mirror. She told everyone it was to make my life easier. In truth, it was her way of collecting proof, tiny props to show that I couldn't function alone. Even the neighbors started asking if I was feeling all right. I smiled and said yes, though I wanted to scream. I didn't forget where the sugar was. I forgot what trust felt like. Some nights she would check my room before bed, pretending to tidy up. I watched her eyes scan the shelves and drawers. She wasn't looking at my belongings. She was counting them. I began hiding small things, my checkbook, my personal ID, under loose tiles and behind books. I never thought I would need to hide from my own child, but fear makes you do strange things. She had taken control of everything except my will, and I intended to keep that hidden too. The hardest part was how gentle she sounded while doing it. Her tone never changed, always calm, always soft. That made her control harder to fight. If she had shouted, I could have defended myself. But kindness mixed with control is poison. It makes you question whether the pain is your fault. I started avoiding conversations. Anything I said could be turned into evidence. If I asked about my bank, she'd say I was paranoid. If I refused help, she'd call me stubborn. It was a trap made of concern. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw her on the phone with someone from the bank. She didn't see me at first. I heard her say my name and the words joint access. When she noticed me, she hung up quickly, smiled, and said she was just confirming an address. My heart pounded. I realized then that all her kindness had a goal. She wasn't waiting for me to get better. She was waiting for me to surrender. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed, staring at the locked drawer where she kept my documents. I wanted to confront her, but I knew it would only feed her story. She would say I was overreacting again, so I kept quiet. I knew I had to be careful. To win against manipulation, you must let the manipulator feel safe. I decided to play along, to act small, to act slow, just until the right moment came. By morning, she told me she'd scheduled another doctor's visit. She said it gently, like a gift. I nodded and agreed. But this time, I had a plan. I would let her take me there. I would let her speak for me again. And I would let the truth walk right into the same room. She thought she was leading me to my own diagnosis. What she didn't know was that she had already written her own. The pattern became clear after a few weeks. It started with small things, then grew bold. She used the same words every time. "It's for your protection, Mom." At first, she told my relatives that she was taking care of everything because I got overwhelmed easily. They believed her. She had a calm, professional way of speaking. People trust confidence, not truth. Soon, everyone looked at her as the devoted daughter. I became the background story in her show. She began visiting my bank more often, always with a new excuse. One day she said the bills were confusing. Another time she said she was simplifying payments. I noticed she always came back with new folders, new signatures, new envelopes. I never saw the mail anymore. If I asked, she smiled and said, "Don't stress, Mom. I've got it." I stopped asking, but I started listening more. I listened to the tone of her voice when she was on the phone. It was lighter when she spoke to the lawyer, colder when she hung up. Her husband didn't interfere. He believed whatever she told him. He said she was a good daughter, responsible. I wanted to tell him that responsibility doesn't mean ownership. But he looked at me with pity, and pity is heavier than anger. So I kept quiet. My house was slowly becoming her house, my things becoming hers. Every decision was now, "we decided," instead of "you decided." She even rearranged my bedroom, saying it was safer near the hallway. It was really just closer to her room, easier to watch me. The neighbors started noticing how she spoke for me. Once, when a neighbor asked me about my garden, my daughter jumped in to answer before I could open my mouth. "Oh, Mom doesn't handle that anymore." She forgets the watering times I stood there silent, pretending it didn't hurt. But that night I watered every plant myself. I needed to remind myself that my hands still worked, my memory still served me, and my life still belonged to me. One morning, she left a stack of documents on the counter. I saw my name written across several pages. I couldn't read much before she came in, but one phrase stood out: transfer of assets upon incapacity. My heart sank. She wasn't waiting for me to die. She was preparing for me to disappear on paper first. She wanted my weakness signed into law. That's when I realized her care wasn't kindness. It was strategy. She wanted to look like a savior while building a cage. I began watching the clock carefully. She made sure I took pills she gave me every evening. She said they were for blood pressure, but I had never seen those pills before. I checked the labels when she wasn't around. They were vitamins, nothing dangerous, but that wasn't the point. She wanted people to believe I was on medication, to add another layer to her story. Every lie she built was supported by small truths. That's how manipulation survives. It hides behind care. My world had become smaller, but my mind became sharper. I started memorizing everything. What she said, what she touched, what she signed. I wrote it all down when she wasn't looking. Dates, times, names. She thought she had total control. She didn't know that I still had my own plan, quiet, patient, invisible. When neighbors visited, I watched how she spoke. She used words like progressing condition and decline. I wanted to shout, "I'm right here," but I stayed silent because I needed proof, not anger. I needed her to think she was winning. Every manipulator shows their full hand when they believe no one is watching. So I smiled, nodded, and pretended to forget things on purpose. She thought it was victory. It was preparation. Soon she started mentioning legal terms I recognized: power of attorney, medical consent, asset control. Each phrase was a thread in the web she was weaving. I knew that if I didn't act soon, I would wake up one day to find my signature on papers I never agreed to. So I made a promise to myself that night. The next time she scheduled a doctor's visit, I would let her lead, and I would let her trap herself. I wasn't losing my mind. I was watching hers unravel. The night before the next appointment, I sat by the window and thought about everything that had happened. The papers, the whispers, the way my daughter looked at me as if I were already fading. I realized that silence had kept me safe, but silence alone would not protect me anymore. I needed proof. I needed the truth to show itself. I decided not to fight her openly. Instead, I would let her believe she was winning. People like her fall hardest when no one pushes them. They trip over their own lies. When she told me about the doctor's visit the next morning, I smiled and thanked her. My calmness confused her. She seemed proud, even relieved, as if her plan was close to completion. I acted as though I didn't remember we had an appointment, then pretended to be grateful for her help. Inside, I felt stronger than I had in months. I wasn't the fragile mother she imagined. I was the woman who raised her, who survived worse storms, who learned patience as a weapon. I called the clinic that evening when she was out of the house. I spoke slowly, clearly, making sure every word was recorded in their system. I requested full evaluations for both of us: cognitive testing for me, stress and mental health screening for her. I said it politely, explaining that both of us had been under tension lately. The nurse agreed and noted it down. I hung up and sat quietly, feeling my heart pound but also something new: control. The next morning, I dressed neatly, combed my hair, and wore the same pearl earrings my late husband had given me. I wanted to look steady, sane, strong. On the ride to the clinic, my daughter spoke about how important this checkup was. She used words like responsibility and caregiver. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. I didn't argue. Every sentence she said was a rope she was tying around herself, not me. At the clinic, she did what she always did: handled the forms, spoke to the receptionist, introduced herself as the person in charge. But when the nurse called both our names, she frowned. "Both?" she asked. The nurse smiled and said, "Yes, as requested." My daughter's confusion was brief. She quickly smiled again and said nothing. I stayed quiet, watching her eyes flicker with unease. That flicker told me I had done the right thing. During the examination, the doctor asked me questions, memory exercises, basic math, pattern recognition. I answered calmly. My daughter sat beside me, pretending not to be bored. When it was her turn, she went through a stress response test, reflex checks, and a short cognitive evaluation for comparison. I watched her grow impatient, her answers rushed, her tone sharp. The doctor's pen moved quickly, making notes I couldn't see. I didn't need to. I already knew that arrogance always exposes itself. Afterward, we sat in the waiting room while the results were processed. She scrolled through her phone, texting someone. I just folded my hands in my lap and waited. For the first time in months, I wasn't nervous about what they'd say. Whatever the papers showed, they would tell the truth, and the truth was finally out of her control. When the doctor came back, he looked uncertain. He held 2 envelopes and asked to speak to both of us together. My daughter leaned forward, expecting to hear confirmation of her story. But the doctor's expression made her sit back. I watched him carefully. He placed 1 envelope in front of her, 1 in front of me, and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." My daughter's smile faltered. I stayed silent. In that moment, I didn't feel anger or victory. I felt peace. The months of manipulation, the stolen trust, the small humiliations, all of it led here. I had chosen patience when she chose deceit, and patience had brought me to justice. That night, as we drove home, she didn't speak much. The papers rested in her lap, unopened. I didn't look at her. I just watched the city lights pass by, thinking how strange it was that freedom could come from something as simple as a decision to stop defending yourself and start proving the truth. After that appointment, everything felt quieter. The doctor had said he would send the final reports within a few days. My daughter pretended everything was normal. She made tea, smiled too much, spoke softly, but her eyes kept glancing at my phone, at my bag, at the mailbox. She was waiting for the papers, and so was I. The difference was that she expected confirmation of her control. I expected freedom. The days in between felt heavy, like sitting between 2 storms, one that had passed and one that was about to begin. She became more careful around me. She asked fewer questions, avoided direct eye contact, but I could feel her tension. She was afraid something might not go her way. I had spent my life reading people, especially my own children. A mother doesn't need evidence. She can sense guilt in silence. Still, I acted normal. I followed her routines. I took my tea when she offered it. I sat in the living room while she pretended to read. Every moment felt like a game I had already won, but still had to play out. The call from the clinic came 3 days later. The nurse confirmed that the reports were ready for collection. I thanked her and said we would come together just like last time. My daughter overheard me and tried to hide her worry. She said she was too busy that day, but I smiled and told her it would only take a few minutes. Her hesitation was brief. Then she agreed, almost forced to. She couldn't risk looking like she was avoiding the truth. That morning, I woke up early and ironed my clothes. It felt like preparing for something bigger than a medical visit, maybe a final test, not of memory, but of dignity. I looked at myself in the mirror, noticing the lines, the gray hair, the tired eyes. For months, I had been made to feel weak, unreliable, even broken. But that reflection showed someone who had survived everything, a woman who still had fight left. I straightened my back and told myself quietly, "Today, we end this." When we reached the clinic, she walked in front of me, greeting the staff confidently, just like before. The receptionist recognized us and smiled politely. We sat in the same waiting room, the same chairs, but the air felt different this time. She scrolled through her phone again, pretending not to care. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Every second stretched long. When the doctor finally appeared, holding a folder, my heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. I was ready. He called both our names. We followed him into the small office. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. My daughter sat down first. I stayed standing for a moment before taking my seat. The doctor looked at both of us carefully, as if measuring the weight of what he was about to say. He pulled out 2 sealed envelopes from the folder and placed them on the table. I saw her name written clearly on one, mine on the other. Then, softly but firmly, he said, There's been some confusion with recent assumptions. She reached for my envelope first, then caught herself and switched to hers. Her hands trembled slightly. The doctor's expression gave away more than his words. I opened mine slowly, scanning the results line by line. Everything normal. No signs of decline. My chest filled with quiet relief. Then I looked up. My daughter was frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the paper as if it might change if she held it tighter. The silence in that room felt endless. I watched her struggle to process what she was reading. I didn't need to see the details to know. The doctor's expression told the rest. The test that was meant to prove my mind was failing had revealed something else. The one losing control wasn't me. We left the clinic without speaking. The drive home was filled with nothing but the hum of the engine. I looked out the window, letting the city pass in soft blurs of light and motion. For the first time in months, I felt no fear, no doubt. The setup was complete. The truth had walked into the room on its own, and it had chosen a side, mine. The doctor walked out into the waiting area holding both envelopes. He looked serious, not nervous, just careful. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. My daughter sat beside me, pretending to scroll on her phone, but her hands were stiff. When he called our names, she stood up first, eager, almost impatient, as if this was a moment of victory she had been waiting for. I followed slowly, my heart calm, not from confidence, but from acceptance. I had already lived with enough truth to face whatever was written inside those papers. Inside the small office, the doctor gestured for us to sit. He placed the two envelopes on the desk, mine on the left, hers on the right. Then he looked between us. His eyes lingered on my daughter a little longer than on me. That small pause said more than words ever could. He began by saying there had been confusion, that sometimes stress and assumption can cloud perception. My daughter smiled, polite and tight. I just nodded. My hands rested in my lap. He handed me my envelope first. The paper was light, but it carried months of humiliation, whispers, and pity. I opened it carefully. My eyes scanned the results. All normal. No signs of cognitive loss, no irregularities, nothing. My memory, my attention, my responses, all intact. I felt warmth spread through my chest. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My silence spoke for itself. I folded the paper neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then I looked at her. She hadn't moved yet. The doctor hesitated before passing her the second envelope. She reached out with steady fingers, but I saw how her wrist trembled slightly. She tore it open quickly, almost defiant. Her eyes moved from line to line, and then they stopped. The color drained from her face. The confident expression disappeared. She blinked several times, as if the words might change if she looked long enough. I watched her lips part, but no sound came out. The doctor gently cleared his throat and said, "I believe this is the report that requires follow-up." Her name was printed clearly at the top. Below it, in neat black letters, were the words, "Cognitive decline indicators detected. Recommend further evaluation." She stared at that sentence as if it was written in another language. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her breathing, shallow, uneven. I didn't speak. I didn't comfort her. I didn't gloat. I just sat there and looked at the wall behind the doctor because I knew the truth didn't need me to defend it. It stood on its own. The doctor explained the findings in a calm tone. He spoke about stress, exhaustion, and genetics. He said sometimes, those who take on too much responsibility show early signs without realizing it. I watched my daughter nod slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller than she had ever looked to me before, not as the controlling figure she'd become, but as the child I once held when she was frightened. That image hurt, but not enough to erase what she had done. When the appointment ended, the doctor stood to shake our hands. I thanked him quietly and left the room first. She followed behind, her steps uncertain. In the hallway, she paused, staring down at the envelope like it carried something poisonous. I kept walking. I had no more strength for her games, no more patience for her lies. The truth was now in writing, permanent, undeniable, fair. Outside, the light was harsh, almost too bright. People moved around us, busy and unaware that a storm had just ended in that small office. My daughter stopped near the door, her shoulders slumped. I turned once to look at her. She seemed lost, the control gone from her face, replaced by confusion and fear. For a brief second, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the months of isolation, the keys she hid, the words she spread about me, losing my mind. Pity had no place here. I walked to the car without waiting. My steps were slow but sure. I didn't need anyone's help to find my way. I opened the door, sat down, and looked out the window. She got in silently beside me, still holding the envelope like it might burn through her hands. We didn't speak the entire ride home. She didn't dare look at me. I didn't need to look at her. The roles had reversed, not out of revenge, but out of truth. She had tried to erase me, but ended up erasing her own certainty instead. When we got home, the house felt different. The walls that had listened to so many lies now stood in silence. My daughter walked behind me, slower than usual, her steps uncertain. She closed the door quietly, like a guest afraid to wake someone. I placed my bag on the table and sat down. I didn't ask her to join me. I wanted her to choose what to do next, tell another lie, or finally face the truth. She stood in the hallway for a long time, clutching that envelope as if it might disappear. I watched her from the corner of my eye. Her face was pale, her hands shaky. She opened her mouth several times but couldn't form a sentence. It was strange seeing her like that. For months she had spoken for me, answered my questions, finished my sentences, twisted my words. Now she couldn't even find her own. She sat down across from me finally, her eyes glassy, like someone who had seen something they didn't want to believe. She kept whispering to herself, reading the report again and again. I didn't interrupt. I had learned that silence cuts deeper than shouting. After a few minutes, she looked up at me. Really looked. There was no anger left in her eyes, only fear and confusion. I could tell she was remembering every cruel thing she had said to me. Every time she told someone I was losing it. Maybe she realized what it felt like to be trapped in someone else's story. Maybe she didn't. Either way, I wasn't going to explain it to her. Some truths don't need speeches. They just need to exist. I got up and went to my bedroom. On the way, I passed the shelf where our family photos were kept. There was one of her as a child sitting on my lap, smiling, holding a toy I had saved months to buy. I paused for a moment, then kept walking. I didn't cry. I was done giving tears to people who turned my love into weakness. In my room, I sat by the window holding my report. I read it again, line by line, slowly. It wasn't pride I felt. It was relief, the kind of relief that comes from being seen clearly after being blurred for so long. They had tried to paint me as fragile, fading, confused, but here, in black and white, was proof that I still had control of my mind, my memory, and my story. I folded the paper and put it inside my drawer, next to my old diary. That drawer now held two things that couldn't be taken from me, my thoughts and my truth. I heard her moving around the living room, pacing, muttering, then the sound of her phone unlocking, followed by silence. Maybe she was deleting messages, maybe trying to hide what she had told others. But lies live longer than words. They leave stains in people's minds. I wondered what she would say now to those who believed her, the relatives, the neighbors, the friends who looked at me with pity. Maybe she would say nothing. Maybe she would vanish from their conversations the same way she had tried to erase me from my own life. Later, she knocked softly on my door. I didn't answer. I didn't have the strength for her apologies, not yet. The truth was too fresh, too raw. I didn't want it twisted or reshaped into another excuse. So I stayed quiet. She knocked again, and when I didn't respond, she walked away. I listened to her footsteps fade, then the sound of a door closing. I thought about how fragile power really is, how easily it shatters when it's built on lies. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of clarity. I kept thinking about how close I had come to losing everything, my home, my dignity, my mind. If I hadn't acted, her story would have become my truth. I would have lived the rest of my days as a shadow of myself, remembered not as who I was, but as who she said I was. The thought chilled me more than any illness ever could. The next morning I made tea. The house was quiet. My daughter didn't come out of her room. I didn't call her. I sat at the table alone, took a slow sip, and looked around. The light coming through the window felt different, softer. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe inside my own home. The truth had finally taken its place at the table, and I didn't need anyone's permission to sit beside it. The next few days passed slowly. My daughter stayed quiet most of the time. She moved through the house like someone carrying a heavy shadow. The confidence that once filled every room was gone. She didn't bark orders, didn't explain herself to anyone. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. I didn't try to comfort her. She needed to sit with the truth the way I had sat with humiliation, for weeks, alone, misunderstood, and powerless. Her friends stopped calling. I could hear her phone vibrate sometimes, then go still. Maybe they had seen the reports. Maybe the doctor had spoken to someone. Secrets don't stay hidden long when shame is involved. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the sofa, staring at nothing. She didn't look up when I entered the room. Her hands were clasped tight, and she kept rubbing her thumb against her wedding ring like she was trying to erase something that wasn't dirt. I walked past her, pretending not to notice. I had spent too many months being invisible to her. Now, it was her turn to know what that felt like. At night, I heard her crying in her room, soft, muffled sobs. I didn't go in. I wasn't cruel, just tired. Every mother dreams of comforting her child, but there comes a time when comfort becomes a reward, and she didn't deserve it yet. She had turned my age into an insult, my kindness into weakness, my mind into a rumor. She didn't break my spirit, but she tried, and now she was breaking under the weight of her own creation. By the third day, the phone rang. It was her brother. I heard her talking quietly in the next room, explaining what had happened. Her voice was shaky, unsure. I caught pieces of sentences. It's all a mistake. She tricked me. The doctor's wrong. The same voice that once sounded so certain now carried panic. Lies start strong and end small. I knew that. When she hung up, she sat at the table with her head in her hands. I made tea for myself and one for her. I placed the cup near her but didn't say a word. She didn't touch it. The following morning, she asked to go to the doctor again. She said she wanted another test, something to prove the first one wrong. I agreed. I had no reason to stop her. Truth doesn't fear repetition. She went alone. When she came back, she didn't speak. She went straight to her room and closed the door. That night, she didn't come out for dinner. The next day, I saw the new report on the kitchen counter. It said the same thing as before. Follow-up required. I placed it under a bowl so it wouldn't blow away and continued cooking. Later that evening, she came to me. Her eyes were swollen, her hair uncombed. She tried to speak, but the words stumbled. I saw guilt, fear, and exhaustion all mixed together. For the first time, I saw her not as my daughter the manipulator, but as my daughter the human being, flawed, broken, lost. Still, I couldn't forget what she did. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without letting it destroy you. And I wasn't ready yet, so I just nodded when she whispered that she was sorry. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. Not yet. Days turned into weeks. The house began to feel normal again, but a different kind of normal. She started cooking sometimes, cleaning quietly, asking me if I needed anything. It felt strange. Politeness from her was unfamiliar, like a language she was learning for the first time. I didn't reject it. I let her try. Maybe guilt had become her teacher, and I had no right to stop that lesson. But the collapse wasn't only hers. It was mine, too. The woman who trusted too easily had also fallen, just in another way. I had to rebuild myself piece by piece, starting with belief. Belief that I could still think clearly, still decide for myself, still live on my own terms. The truth had saved me, but it had also aged me. Every victory comes with a cost. Mine was the end of a relationship that had already died long before that doctor's visit. Sometimes at night, I still hear her crying softly. Not every wound shows in a report. I wish things could go back to how they were before greed and pride took over. But I know better. Once someone shows you what they're capable of, you can never unsee it. I can live with sadness, but not with lies. Justice came quietly, not like thunder, but like a slow sunrise. It didn't shout or punish. It just revealed the truth to everyone who needed to see it. A week after the last doctor's visit, a neighbor came to the house. She had seen something on the local news, a small report about elder abuse awareness. My story had been mentioned, not names, but enough details that people in our neighborhood understood. The whispers that once painted me as forgetful now called me brave. It wasn't pride that I felt, just relief. The truth had finally found its way to light without me having to scream for it. My daughter avoided going outside for days. The same relatives who once called her such a good caretaker now stopped answering her calls. Her friends looked at her differently. The pity she had built for me had turned back on her. I didn't celebrate it. It hurt to see her fall, even if she had built the cliff herself. But pain doesn't erase wrongdoing. It only teaches. Maybe this was her lesson. Maybe life had finally held up a mirror. I started living differently after that. I took back my house keys. I handled my bills again. I walked to the market by myself. Every step felt like a small victory. The shopkeepers who once looked at me with gentle pity now smiled with respect. They said, "You're strong." I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't strong, just tired of being treated like a ghost in my own life. When people stop believing your voice, survival becomes quiet work. You prove yourself not by talking, but by continuing to exist fully. At home, my daughter tried to fix things. She started cooking again, cleaning, offering me tea every evening. I accepted it silently, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. Maybe guilt had changed her, or maybe she was simply afraid of losing what little remained. I no longer needed to guess her reasons. I only needed peace. And peace came from boundaries, not from pretending everything was fine. One evening, I found her sitting with her son, my grandson. He was helping her with a puzzle. He looked up at me and smiled, saying, "Grandma, we're fixing it." The words hit me deeper than he knew. Maybe that's what this was now. A long, slow fixing. Not between mother and daughter, but between generations. I sat beside them quietly. The puzzle pieces were small and scattered, much like us. Still, we kept trying to make them fit. A few weeks later, I returned to the clinic alone. The doctor asked how things were. I told him, "Better." He nodded and said, "You did the right thing." I wanted to believe him. Doing the right thing shouldn't have to feel so lonely, but sometimes it does. I walked home afterward, passing the park where children played. For the first time in months, I stopped to watch. The sound of laughter didn't hurt anymore. It reminded me that life still moves forward, even when hearts lag behind. When I reached home, my daughter was outside watering the plants I once cared for. She looked tired but calm. She didn't see me at first. I watched her for a moment. The way her hands trembled slightly, the way she still looked around nervously as if waiting for judgment. I almost went to help her, but I didn't. Some tasks must be done alone. She needed to rebuild herself the same way I had, slowly, quietly, with no shortcuts. That night I sat by the window with my cup of tea. The house was quiet. The moonlight touched the edge of the table where my medical report still sat folded. I hadn't thrown it away. It wasn't just proof of health, it was proof of survival. I thought about how easy it is to lose control when others decide who you are. I promised myself that no one would ever do that to me again. Justice, I realized, doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it's simply truth revealed in time, truth that clears the fog, truth that restores your name, truth that lets you sleep without fear. My daughter had tried to take my mind, my choices, my independence, but she failed. I was still here, still myself, still standing. I didn't need her apology anymore. The truth was apology enough. And as I turned off the lights and closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.